How's everybody doing? Welcome to the Strategy Room on this Saturday night, July 26th, 2025. It's so great to be here with everyone. I hope everyone is having a great weekend so far. I've got a ton of stuff for everyone tonight. We're obviously going to be talking a lot of tariff news. We're going to be talking about Trump's visit over to the Federal Reserve and what does that mean. We're going to be talking about the upcoming Federal Reserve meeting this week and about interest rates. I have a ton of banking related news and stories. There's just so much happening every week. It's rather amazing. But I'm going to start off here this week, as I always do. We're going to check in on the U.S. debt clock and just see how we're doing. So we're still cruising at 37,000 or 37,000. 37. I'm an airport pilot now. I'm an airplane pilot now. We're cruising at 37,000 feet. We have $37 trillion in national debt. We're still a little over $2 trillion in our annual federal budget deficit. The Doge clock is now up to 571 million or billion. Gosh, I got to get this right here tonight. 571 billion with savings per taxpayer of $5,084. We still have a debt to GDP of 123%, but I've got some very good news for everybody tonight. So, the first round of Doge cuts actually went through this week, which was fantastic. So Trump signs bill to cancel $9 billion for foreign aid and public broadcasting. The package claws back $7.9 billion in appropriated funds for global aid and $1.1 billion for NPR and PBS. But this was the first Doge cuts package that went through here. So Donald Trump signed a bill on July 24th to claw back $9 billion in federal spending. Ahead of the signing, Trump said on Truth Social that the House's approval of the bill was big. It rescinds $7.9 billion in spending under the now defunct U.S. Agency for International Development, whose responsibilities have been folded into the State Department. The bill was initially set to rescind $9.4 billion, but $400 million was stripped out. That cut would have removed funding for PEPFAR, a State Department initiative that combats HIV and AIDS abroad. The bill also eliminates $1.1 billion for the Corporation of Public Broadcast, which supports National Public Radio and the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, both of which have been accused by conservative critics and the Trump administration of liberal bias. Can't imagine that. But anyway, so again, the first round of Doge cuts going through, which is great. I think they're going to be looking at a lot more Doge cuts now as we roll throughout the rest of the summer and into the fall. So I was great to see it. It's a good first step, and we'll see where we go from here. But obviously, if you go back to the clock for a second, there's $571 billion that are still out there. So still got cutting $9 billion. Okay, nice little start, but we still got a long way to go. Okay, I want to talk about crypto here for just a second. So the ICBA put this out this week. Basically, last week we had the Genius Act, which went through, and now that bill has been passed into law, we're still waiting on two other crypto bills to go through the process. They've been approved by the House. They're sitting with the Senate. We have to wait to see what the Senate's going to do. But now that the Genius Act is through, what does this really mean for banks? And so I just wanted to read this for a second. And the key thing here is going to be about the implementation timeline. When does all this basically take effect? So we know President Trump signed the Genius Act on July 18th. We know about that. But what payment stablecoins and the Genius Act? So given the complexity of this debate, let's start with the basics. Payment stablecoins are largely unregulated digital assets that are intended to be pegged to a fixed reference asset, such as a national currency, to maintain a stable value. Under the law, they are designed to be used as a means of payment or settlement and must be backed on a one-to-one basis with reserves such as treasuries, U.S. currency, and funds held as demand deposits at insured depository institutions, among others. With the total amount of stablecoins in circulation exceeding 250 billion, policymakers have sought to establish a federal regulatory framework to ensure stablecoin issuers have the reserve assets they claim to possess and are subject to anti-money laundering compliance, otherwise known as AML. AML. In an effort to mitigate the risks posed by stablecoins, lawmakers passed the Genius Act, which establishes a regulatory framework for this largely unregulated market. This new law, a top priority of the Trump administration and congressional leadership, provides for stablecoin issuance by a subsidiary of an insured depository institution, federal qualified non-bank issuers, and state non-bank qualified issuers. The law also specifies allowable issuer activities and bars issuers from paying interest to stablecoin holders, requires issuers to maintain reserves on at least one-to-one basis, and more. So, a very critical part of this sentence, it bars issuers from paying interest to stablecoin holders. Now, why do you think that is? Well, banks had a major concern about, in other words, if stablecoins paid interest, that could be competition for, say, a savings account, a CD, a money market account, even certain types of checking accounts. So banks did not want the stablecoins to pay interest, and thus being now a competitor for other bank deposits. Because one of the big fears here that I've reported on in an episode, so there was a Treasury report that came out at the end of March, and in that Treasury report about stablecoins, it basically said that, hey, if all of this that we're now talking about, if this comes to fruition, there is the potential that as stablecoins really grow, if they grow up to $2 or $3 trillion in size, they could take anywhere from 10 to 20% of the existing deposit base out of banks and put them into stablecoins. Now, and this is where it gets tricky, because we're not real sure how that is all going to play out. We have to wait to see what happens there. Like, in other words, what's the big concern there? Well, deposits are the lifeblood of any bank. So if you take the deposits out of the bank, that then limits what the bank can lend. So as it becomes a credit issue, it becomes an issue of credit availability. You don't, and in certain respects, it can also become a liquidity issue too. You don't want to create those you don't want to unintentionally create those problems for banks. So that's what one of the big parts of this is. So, but let's continue here. So now this is the key thing here. The law takes effect the earlier of 18 months after enactment or 120 days after the date on which primary federal payment stablecoin regulators issue final regulations implementing the act. However, community bankers will likely not see the full effect of the law until the regulatory process is complete. So, in other words, we're still waiting on these other two acts to come into play. Like I explained last week, and the crypto episode that I did, and also in the live stream last week, what is being proposed right now is basically a three-legged stool of regulation. And we've got one leg, the Genius Act, one leg of that is in there. So we have the Clarity Act, which basically is the regulatory framework act, or the market structure, if you will, of how this is supposed to work. But then we also have the Anti-CBDC Act, the Central Bank Digital Currency Act. So all of those three pieces of legislation together create this three-legged stool framework, basically, for how this is all going to work. So what this is really saying is that, hey, look, the law has taken effect, but it might be 18 months before we see this enacted. We have to wait for the regulators to basically issue the regulation and see what all the pertinent details are of it. So it's going to be a little while. And I really wanted to point this out to people so that people didn't get the impression that, like, oh, okay, Trump signed this law into place last week, therefore it's all going to happen immediately. Like, no. The regulators have to work on it. They got to put out their rule. They got to put all the details in there. And that takes a little bit of time for all that to happen. But ultimately, it also sounds like they're going to wait until these other couple pieces of legislation go through, so that we have all three pieces of legislation together, and then the regulators can work on all that at one time, basically put this out, and then see what happens there. So that's basically the timeline of what we're looking at here. So and then this just wraps up by saying, so why the stablecoin debate matters to community banks. So while bipartisan passage and signing of the Genius Act is generating much media attention, the debate over stablecoin policy is not new. ICBA has directly engaged with policymakers on developing a regulatory framework for stablecoins since the conversation began several years ago, with the process culminating under the new Trump administration and the 119th Congress. Throughout the debate over the Genius Act, ICBA worked closely with lawmakers to ensure the bill addresses key community bank concerns and includes high priority changes to previous versions. Our focus was on ensuring any bill providing regulatory clarity for the digital assets sector includes needed guardrails against community bank disintermediation, in other words, losing deposits. So ICBA's work with lawmakers has resulted in positive changes to the Genius Act, including strengthening language restricting Federal Reserve master accounts. I might have done an episode on that last week or this week rather. Expanding the bill's prohibition on yield and interest-bearing stablecoins, limiting non-financial companies' ability to issue stablecoins, tightening permissible activities of issuers, and ensuring issuers cannot claim stablecoins are FDIC insured. Meanwhile, Congress continues to debate the Clarity Act, a separate market structure bill that would determine which crypto assets and intermediaries are regulated by the Commodities Futures Trading Commission or the Securities and Exchange Commission. Following House passage of that bill, it now heads to the Senate. And then it basically says, ongoing advocacy as the debate continues. And there you have it. So again, just wanted to bring everybody this update on the Genius Act and kind of crypto legislation that's going forward right now. I'm going to have a story here in a minute. We're going to kind of switch gears and go to AI and talk about what executive action that Donald Trump just took on AI this week. But before we get to that, I always love to show this. One of my favorite acronyms, NACHA. I love the ACH network. So we got the second quarter 2025 ACH network numbers. So volume totals 8.7 billion. Same day ACH volume grows 15.1% from a year earlier. So we can see that of the 8.7 billion in total activity, we had 4.9 billion in debits and 3.9 billion in credits. Business to business volume increased 10.6%, going from 1.8 billion in the second quarter of 24 to 2 billion in the second quarter of 25. Volume going up very nicely from 292.3 million to 336.4 million. The value raised up from 803.3 billion in the second quarter of 24 to 980.3 billion in the second quarter of 2025, and that was for same day ACH volume. Volume across major transaction types compared to the second quarter of 24. So we can see healthcare is up 9.9% at 138 million. The internet is up 5.8% at 2.8 billion. Direct deposit up 2.2% to 2.2 billion, and P2P, meaning peer-to-peer payments, up 21% at 113 million. So, and again, they put out a great little infographic here, and I like to just point this out just so how people can see the volume of digital payments. How is the volume of digital payments increasing, and how does that look? B2B payments, peer-to-peer payments, same day ACH volume. So all different types of digital payments. And it's important to keep an eye on this because obviously the increase of digital payments, and we still look, we look at checks, we look at cash, we look at all these other different payment channels. But like I said, I like to keep an eye on digital to see, just see what's happening there. So another interesting thing that happened this week. So Charles Schwab is expanding 24-hour trading to 1,100 securities. So Charles Schwab said on Monday it is adding more securities, primarily ETFs, for 24-hour trading, bringing the total to 1,100 stocks and funds that retail investors can access outside normal U.S. business hours. Its rivals, Robinhood and Intercontinental Exchange, have been moving toward extending trading hours that go beyond the regular session, during which volumes are highest, and the traditional pre-market and after-hour sessions. The most traded stocks that Charles Schwab said it has seen since launching 24-hour trading earlier this year are shares of Tesla, AI darling NVIDIA, and Chinese EV maker NIO. I don't know if that's pronounced NIO or whatever, but the company said. So this is just interesting. I like to point this out because we can see here that we are heading in this direction of 24-hour-a-day trading. Maybe not everything gets offered, or maybe not everything becomes available. I mean, the currency market, the Forex market is basically, that market is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can go on and trade Forex anytime you want. But this is stocks, bonds, ETFs, mutual funds, all this kind of stuff. So this is where the trend is going, though. But basically, I think we are going to get into this point of basically 24-hour trading. I think the question is, does it become a 7-day thing, or do we just start out at maybe like a Monday? You could trade 24 hours Monday through Friday, and then maybe the weekends take a little bit longer to get to, but we'll see where this goes. But just I think a very interesting development, and something to keep an eye on, because hey, we don't have enough trading hours in the day. We need it to be 24/7, 365. Okay. Another interesting story. Commerce Secretary Lutnick says that TikTok will go dark if China won't agree to U.S. control of the social media app. So Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said TikTok will go dark for Americans unless China agrees to give the U.S. more control over the app. Congress passed a bill last year that would ban TikTok unless its Chinese-owned ByteDance divested from it. President Donald Trump extended the deadline for Chinese divestiture for a third time, giving ByteDance until September 17th. Now, obviously, a lot of people on TikTok, a lot of people making money off of TikTok. I've had a couple of interviews. If anybody knows Alex Blum Creates, she's a friend of the channel. She has come on and done a number of interviews with me over the last couple of years here. But Alex Blum, her business, Alex Blum Creates, she primarily uses TikTok. That is her primary vehicle for sales, and she makes a very good amount of money off of selling stuff on TikTok. And she was kind enough to come on and do that interview with me because I thought that, her business was a great example of how people actually make money on TikTok. And there's a number of different ways. She opened my eyes. I'm not necessarily a TikTok person. I'm not on TikTok. So I didn't fully understand a lot of the creative ways that TikTok was giving people opportunity to make money. And it could be small amounts of money. It could be $500 a month, $1,000 a month, but they have a lot of clever ways of allowing people to make money. So I think, this is a very important thing, I think, for a lot of people. I don't know that people necessarily realize how many small business owners in the United States have a good side gig or a good thing going on TikTok. And so this could cause a little, if TikTok does go down, and I'm not necessarily saying that I am totally against TikTok going down, because I do think that the issues with the Chinese government and what they may or may not be doing with everybody's data on there, it is an issue of major concern. And it's not something that can be, dismissed out of hand or cavalier, just, oh yeah, we don't need to worry about that. No, I think it's a pretty big issue, and it needs to be, I think, looked into or examined a little bit on a deeper level. So again, I just like to bring this up just to talk about it, just again, make people aware of it, that this thing is still out there. And if something can't be agreed upon, it's sooner or later, this is going to come to a head, and it may not go well for TikTok and people that use TikTok all the time. So we'll see what happens. Okay, interesting story here with Microsoft this week. So, and I've got two articles here on this because one leads, I think, directly to the other. Microsoft stops using China-based engineers for Pentagon tech support as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth orders a review. So Senator Tom Cotton had raised concerns over reports that Microsoft hired Chinese engineers to work on the Defense Department's cloud system. This was a kind of shocking story here, basically. And basically what was happening was Microsoft was outsourcing these services to, Chinese firms to work on highly sensitive government documents. And this apparently has been going on for years. So this was pretty messed up. So basically Microsoft comes out and, a Secretary of State orders this review. Microsoft comes out and says, okay, we're stopping all that, right? Well, as soon as they do that, this happens. Microsoft says Chinese hacking groups exploited SharePoint vulnerability and attacks. And it, is kind of interesting to me that people didn't put, one and one together. That, okay, obviously the Chinese upset that perhaps they're not getting the peek at a lot of sensitive stuff. So they basically got mad at Microsoft and they, basically did this, Microsoft said 3 hacking groups tied to China have exploited a vulnerability affecting some versions of its SharePoint collaboration software. Gee, I wonder how they got access to that SharePoint collaboration software. Could it be that they were just letting them in there and they were just using that to share a whole bunch of information they shouldn't have been sharing? I don't know. Maybe. SharePoint enables people inside organizations to access internal files. Yeah, no blank. You know what? Attackers in China also sought to exploit vulnerabilities in Microsoft's Exchange server email and calendar software 4 years ago. So, and again, not that this is necessarily a new issue. I mean, hacking issues, data breaches, all this kind of stuff has been happening for quite a while. It's nothing new. It's nothing shocking. But this is a concern. I mean, why am I necessarily talking about this? Well, because it's Microsoft and, hello, Microsoft 365, SharePoint. There are, a lot of banks around the country, a lot of financial services firms, a lot of companies in general using Microsoft's products and, and are on Microsoft's cloud servers, more importantly. So again, this has the ability to affect a lot of banks, a lot of financial services firms around the country if Microsoft can't seemingly, get a handle on this. So again, just something to point out here. So, okay, this was a wild story this week. So China bans Wells Fargo executive from leaving, reviving fears of hostage diplomacy. So the incident highlights the CCP's hostage diplomacy and might be related to CCP top officials sending money abroad, observers said. Now, what's interesting about this is that if anybody has been watching, I believe in the last month or so, I had covered another article on China, which they were basically, vanishing a whole bunch of their bankers over there in China. A bunch of their bankers were getting either caught in bribery type situations, or some of the bankers maybe weren't playing ball, weren't doing the kind of things they wanted them to do, and so a lot of bankers over in China were getting disappeared. I thought it was a very interesting article, so I talked about that. Now we've got this situation here with this Wells Fargo, this banker who works for Wells Fargo, basically getting stuff here. So let's see. So a senior executive of Wells Fargo, a U.S. citizen, has been banned from leaving China, renewing concerns over doing business in the communist state. Analysts said that amid continued tensions between China and the United States and the Chinese Communist Party's intensified internal conflicts, safety risks faced by foreign businessmen in China are rising sharply. U.S.-based, and I apologize if I say that, Chen-Yu Mao, head of Wells Fargo's international factoring business, has been banned from leaving China after entering the country in recent weeks. Mao was born in Shanghai and now lives in Atlanta. The U.S. banking giant has reportedly suspended all travel to China after the incident. We are closely tracking the situation and working through the appropriate channels so our employee can return to the United States as soon as possible, Wells Fargo said in a statement on July 17th. A spokesperson for the U.S. Embassy in Beijing say we have raised our concern with Chinese authorities about the impact arbitrary exit bans on U.S. citizens have on our bilateral relations and urge them to immediately allow impacted U.S. citizens to return home. The embassy would not comment on the specifics of the case. China often detains people on charges of espionage and economic crimes, but the charges often lack transparency or evidence and are more of diplomatic leverage. Yi Yao Wan, professor of political science and international studies at the University of St. Thomas, told the Epoch Times on July 18th, hostage diplomacy has become a common practice of the CCP, he said. Yi said that as the trade tensions and technological competition between the United States and China continue, such practice may be intended as bargaining chips but will only further deteriorate the business environment and prompt foreign companies to reassess the risk of investing in China. And then there's been, a string of similar incidents. And I think I think that's about it. But then I also saw in some other related articles that we're not going to go into now, but I think it was who was it? Was it Morgan? Maybe Morgan Stanley. A couple other big investment firms were basically telling their employees, like, "Hey, look, if you're working over there, stay in your hotels. Don't go out. Like, close your laptop. Don't get on your laptops. Don't get on your cell phones. Like, just shut it down and sit tight. Don't do anything. Like, basically, just don't go into work. Don't go into the office." So so again, I think this is an evolving situation. We will see what happens here, but this is, obviously highly concerning. This is, I think this is troubling for, and not just banks, but any company in the U.S. that does business in China has to be concerned with seeing this. So again, just kind of a wild story out there. So here's another rather interesting story. So the Trump administration greenlights a gold mine in Nevada. The approval follows Trump signing an executive order to boost domestic mineral production. So the Bureau of Land Management, BLM, has approved the Spring Valley Gold Mine project in Nevada. The project, located in Pershing County, is expected to create hundreds of jobs in the region, the agency said in a July 15th statement. Solidus Resources, LLC, is approved to construct, operate, and maintain an open pit gold mine, 3 waste rock facilities, and a heap leach facility, the agency stated. So Solidus will carry out mining activity on approximately 6,232 acres of land, of which 4,123 acres are public land managed by BLM, with the remaining private. The project will employ a contractor workforce of approximately 130 employees during the initial 2-year construction and approximately 250 full-time employees for the operations period. The total life of the project will be 21 years, the BLM stated. So according to a feasibility study, the mine published by Solidus on February 15th, the project is a large-scale, low-cost gold production initiative. The study forecasts an average of more than 300,000 ounces of gold annually from the mine over a 10-year period. So again, this is just really interesting. You don't hear about a whole lot of gold mines getting approved and getting put out there every day. So it was an interesting article I thought I would share with everyone. Okay. Now let's talk about the AI action plan. So Trump released this week an AI action plan, signing 3 executive orders to foster American innovation. So the 28-page plan lays out a strategy to support the artificial intelligence industry and bolster national and economic security. So President Donald Trump announced a new artificial intelligence AI action plan and signed 3 executive orders during an AI summit at the Andrew W. Mellon Auditorium on Wednesday. America is the country that started the AI race. As the President of the United States, I am here today to declare that America is going to win it, Trump told the hundreds in attendance. The 28-page document outlines the administration's plan to lead in diplomacy, development, and manufacturing, positioning the United States to continue leading the worldwide AI competition. He said the nation is leading its closest competitor, China, very substantially. The president noted that the communist regime is pouring resources into the race and benefits from a lack of regulations that limit innovation and expansion. To sustain a competitive advantage, Trump vowed to facilitate the construction of data centers, manufacturing facilities, power plants, and transmission lines. My administration will use every tool at our disposal to ensure the United States can build, maintain the largest, most powerful, and advanced AI infrastructure anywhere on the planet. So he then signed an executive order to accelerate the permitting process at the federal level for data center infrastructure projects by limiting regulations across agencies. If you regulate them too much, you kill the source of American genius and technological power, Trump said. The order intends to expedite construction timelines and also calls for the use of federal lands for the development of data centers. According to the order, these technologies are essential to national security, economic prosperity, and scientific leadership, and will bolster technological innovation and manufacturing projects. The directive also revoked Executive Order 14141, which regulated AI development, signed by President Joe Biden during his last week in office. Another order Trump signed at the event, titled Preventing Woke AI in the Federal Government, introduces regulations to prohibit the use of AI models trained with diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and other similar programs. I encourage all American companies to join us in rejecting poisonous Marxism in our technology. Agencies are ordered not to contract with any company that trains its AI with ideologies that includes transgenderism, critical race theory, unconscious bias, and others. The order also declares that the federal government has the obligation not to procure models that sacrifice truthfulness and accuracy to ideological agendas. So there you have it. So again, I think these orders are very interesting. These are some very interesting developments. I did report last week on an article where I said, I think it was Westinghouse is basically said they want to build 10 brand new nuclear reactors in the United States over the next couple of years. I think it's probably going to take them a little longer than a couple of years, but this is really interesting. Here's I'll just say this as a side note. Here is my big concern with a lot of this AI and with these massive data centers and everything that's in there. They are going to require a tremendous amount of electricity, and what does that do to our current grid? What is the danger with our current grid? I mean, I think the current danger is that the existing AI infrastructure and all these new data centers that are coming online are going to sap the electricity, and they're going to massively drive up electricity costs for the everyday consumer, the everyday household out there. That could potentially be a big problem, and I think that is something that this administration, different companies, companies like Exelon, other companies out there. I mean, they are going to have to keep a very, very close eye on this, and we're going to have to watch this and see what transpires, what happens. Okay, now on to the next thing. So. So I've got an open banking here thing for everybody that I wanted to talk about here for a minute. So fintech trade groups seek Trump aid on open banking. So fintechs and merchants urged the president to take on big banks and let the CFPB's open banking rule move forward. So there's still this open banking rule still out there, still in court. So fintech firms and merchants asked President Donald Trump to intervene with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to support their position in a court battle with large banks over the fate of the U.S. open banking rule. 10 trade associations sent Trump a letter Wednesday appealing directly to his American-focused agenda in keeping the U.S. a global leader in financial services. The fintechs want Trump to direct the Bureau to ask the court to affirm that consumers, not big banks, control their financial data and have the right to access and share it with companies of their choice at no cost. Now, I think that this is a vast twisting of what is really going on here. The CFPB has a court deadline of July 29th to respond to a filing by the Financial Technology Association, which has intervened in the litigation to defend the open banking rule. So just for anybody who doesn't know, here's a recap of kind of what is going on with this. So CFPB last year proposed and put forward their Rule 1031, which was also known as the open banking rule. They put that out there, and then this year, with the new administration coming in, taking over the CFPB, they basically put forth, they went to the court and said, "Hey, we don't like this rule. We don't like what it's doing. So we're putting the kibosh on this." Okay, so it was about to kind of end this thing. And then these fintech trade associations basically came along and said, no, we still want the open banking rule. And obviously for main reasons, they want to get their hands on everybody's banking data. Okay, plain and simple. And the open banking rule hands it to them on a silver platter. I am vehemently opposed to open banking. I hate the concept of open banking. And I'm sorry, you're not going to convince me that you're giving people more control over that. How does me or anyone else giving their data to Google give you more control over it? Okay, I don't personally have control of the data. It goes to a bunch of other companies. So somebody sending me endless, somebody texting me endless coupons, or knowing where I shop, when I shop, everything that I buy, everything I do every second of the day. How does that give me more control over my data exactly? It does not. It absolutely does not. But now I want to read I want to read. Well, hold on. I just want to make. Okay. So, all right. So I give you guys the gist here. So now, now let me read this. So this is a blog post from Emily McCormick over at Bank Director. So, and this is called Fair Play. So, while the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's open banking rule continues to work its way through the courts, JP Morgan Chase & Company has decided to charge fintechs to access customer data. The fees, which could be negotiated, would vary based on how the data is used, according to Bloomberg, with payment providers paying higher fees. In many ways, the CFPB's rule, tied to Section 1033 of the Dodd-Frank Act, was seen as a net good for consumers and reflected a different financial landscape compared to 15 years ago. In the final rule, the CFPB estimated that at least 100 million consumers had authorized a third party to access their account data. Americans now use an array of financial products and services that connect to one another. Payments platform Venmo, for instance, pays the intermediary Plaid to connect banks via application programming interfaces, APIs, to verify account information and ensure there are enough funds for a transaction. But so far, some of that connection has been on the banking industry's dime. We've invested significant resources creating a valuable and secure system that protects customer data, a Chase spokesperson told Bank Director. The CFPB's final rule prohibited depository institutions over $850 million in assets from charging third parties and data aggregators like Plaid a bitter pill to swallow when some of those third parties are also competitors. So yes, so there was basically one of the major problems with the 1033 rule was that there was no monetary incentive, no monetary compensation for banks at all. None, zero. It's basically just somebody's going to back up, plug in an API to this portal at the back of the bank and siphon out all their data. So, but I digress. Hang on. Chase CEO and chairman Jamie Dimon stated his concerns about this friction in the bank's shareholder letter earlier this year. Third parties want full access to banks' customer data so they can exploit it for their own purposes and profits, he wrote. Yes, ding, 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 bingo. It's understandable that Chase would want reimbursement for some of its infrastructure investments, and it's likely other banks would follow. PNC Financial Services Group CEO and Chairman William Demchek told analysts on Wednesday, "We're in discussions on it. I applaud what JP did. Banks may want to seek a balance in those arrangements to ensure they're not anti-competitive." Andrew Grant, a partner at the law firm Runaway Group, who primarily represents fintechs, says one consequence could be the return of screen scraping, a less secure method of accessing customer data that 1033 didn't ban outright. The CFPB expected the practice to fall out of favor due to the preference for APIs. If banks charge high fees that are then passed along by data aggregators, cash-strapped fintech startups could use screen scraping as a cheaper alternative. That, to me, is a real future risk for charging for access in a non-competitive way, says Grant. So again, just a lot happening with this 1033 rule. Again, the monetary motive here, that's okay. That's okay. That's a piece of this rule that I certainly complained about. But I think the bigger issue that I have with this is that the way that this bill was proposed, and that is it was proposed in this guise of this is great for the consumer. This is great for the consumer. This is going to give the consumer, it's going to continue to, modernize banks and bring them into the future. And it's going to give consumers all this control over their data. And it's going to make it easier for them to switch from one bank to the next. How in the world is this going to make it easier for you to switch from one bank to the next? I'm sorry. Did banks all of a sudden, or is all the regulation going away? Do banks all of a sudden have to stop complying with AML and BSA and know your customer and CIP and EDD and 100 other acronyms for 100 other pieces of regulation that banks are required to deal with every single day? I don't think so. Again, this is why, like, it's a fallacy. It's a fallacy. It's a fantasy. You're not going to get more control over your data. You're going to have less control over your data. Your data is going to be given away to any company that basically wants to back up and plug into the bank and take it out. And then what does the bank do? And again, they're using APIs, okay? Any cybersecurity expert is going to tell you that there are two types of APIs. There are internal APIs and there are external APIs. The internal APIs are fine because that's within a company's walls, okay? No issue there. It's the external APIs that are major security threats. APIs are not that secure. They are absolutely hackable. So when you have a number of companies backing up to the back, and I'm using this metaphorically here, like, backing up to the bank, plugging into this portal with their API and siphoning out all the data. It is not a question of if, it's a question of when you're going to have a major data breach, and all of this customer data is going to be out. It's going to be spilled out there onto the web, the dark web, wherever. And then what happens to that bank in that moment when that happens? I don't even know. It terrifies me just to think about it. So again, this open banking thing we're going to see here on July 29th, like what happens here and what the court ultimately decides to do with this. I am hoping that this thing gets shot down and basically that's the end of it, at least for right now. I mean, I think that this kind of thing has a tendency to keep coming back again time after time. So we'll see, again, we'll see what happens with this. Okay. Switching gears yet again. Okay. So the Fed this week basically held the first of its kind. The Federal Reserve held their own kind of first of its kind banking conference, which in and of itself is very interesting. So, but at this Fed banking conference, Sam Altman showed up and they talked about capital rules and they tried to avoid the Powell drama, which we are going to get into that. Believe me, I did not forget about that. We got a whole bunch of stuff on that coming real short. A new gathering tries to turn the page for the Fed's banking supervision and the nation's banks. So the Federal Reserve convened top bankers to discuss a new approach to banking regulation after the Basel III endgame failed. Bankers are advocating for simpler, less burdensome rules, while proponents of stringent regulations fear a repeat of past crises. Treasury Secretary Bessent said the Treasury will take a leading role in setting the Trump administration's banking regulation agenda. So the Federal Reserve wants to do things differently this time around, at least when it comes to banking regulation. After a package of strict requirements known as the Basel III Endgame fizzled last year, the Fed on Tuesday convened some of the nation's top bankers to discuss a new way forward. The first of its kind conference is the creation of the Fed's new top regulatory official, Michelle Mickey Bowman, and her stated goal is more transparency. It features speakers from JP Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, and even a fireside chat with OpenAI's Sam Altman. The message from bankers is clear: simpler, less onerous rules. Capital requirements dictate the size of the safety buffers banks need to keep to survive periods of market turmoil. And for years, bankers had been sparring with Bowman's predecessors about them. Mike Mayo, a research analyst at Wells Fargo, arrived with a roll of red tape. This is the hope, he said, before pulling out a pair of children's scissors and taking a snip. 35 years ago, the capital rules were simple and weak, and today they are complex and strong, he said. Let's make them simpler and strong. So, what happened here? So basically, you had this Basel III endgame, right? And this came from Brussels, it came from Switzerland, it came from, partially came out of the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements. And Basel III was absolutely ridiculous. It was just these insane over-the-top capital rules would have really placed an immense burden on banks. And it was very much a knee-jerk reaction to the banking crisis that happened in the spring of 2023, which basically caused, because remember, what do you have over there in Switzerland? You have Credit Suisse and UBS. Credit Suisse, one of the biggest banks over there in Europe, and oldest, basically collapsed in spectacular fashion, had to get absorbed by UBS. Obviously, that set off the guys there in Brussels, and they basically ran out and said, oh, we got to have this Basel III endgame, and we're going to put all these strict capital rules on because that's going to be the answer for everything. And, a lot of the bankers here in America, particularly, Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan, whatever, basically got in there and said, wait a minute, time out. We're not doing this. This is a knee-jerk reaction. This is crazy. This is over the top, and we're not doing it. And I was very happy to see, look, maybe it's the American in me. I can't stand taking guidance from people in Brussels and Switzerland and Europe. I'm sorry. Like hey, let them do their thing. That's fine. We're going to do our thing here in America. We're not, and it's something that for the last 25 years has just stuck in my craw that, these guys, the over there, the Tower of Basel, okay, the biz, and then obviously in Brussels, these guys just, from their arrogant perch, they sit there and try to, they're going to tell the rest of the world, they're going to tell us here in America how it's going to be and what we're going to do with our regulation and our capital rules and everything. And they give you all this, this BS about, oh, it's just for the global good. And we all, if we can't just have like you guys doing what you want over there in America. Oh, yeah, actually, yeah, we can. Yeah, you can. Yeah, we can and we will do what we want over here in America. Okay. And we don't care what you guys have to say about it. Again, again, I'll get off my soapbox here. Reel it in, man. Reel it in. All right. So we come back to this banking conversation. So now they're trying to figure out like, okay, what do we do here around these capital rules? Like, what do we do? Do we increase the capital rules? Do we try to, again, I think we're looking for, we want to make them a little bit simpler, but yet keep them very strong. And the capital that banks have right now is a strong base. Banks are operating from a very strong base of capital. So again, was kind of the hope of this thing. But this, again, this little Fed conference here was just a very interesting little thing here. Didn't get a whole lot of play for obvious reasons, because of other things that were going on this week with maybe a certain president visiting the Federal Reserve. But then here's another article here on it. So this says, this is from Banking Drive, and this says basically Fed Capital Conference panelists stress the need for Basel III alignment. So an all-day conference Tuesday gave industry experts a platform to press regulators to take a holistic approach to bank capital rules. So here's all the, so basically you had a bunch of people for the Basel, the Brussels sycophants sitting there basically saying, we have to have this. We have to have this. Because if we don't, we're all going to be in trouble. Like, yeah, okay. So anyway, just an interesting thing that I wanted to note about this little conference here. And we shall see what comes of it in the following months. So, all right. Now, let's get into some trade here. I got a bunch of trade articles here because there was a lot of stuff coming in here. So, obviously, the big news coming out on Monday was that Donald Trump had cut a major deal with Japan. And we've got still more talks on the EU, still some more talks with countries over in Africa that we're going to run through here in a minute. But let's start with the Japan deal here. So President Donald Trump announced new trade deals with Japan and the Philippines this week, bringing the total number of deals to 5. However, several major trading partners still haven't reached trade agreements with the U.S. ahead of the August 1st deadlines. Negotiations with the European Union are ongoing as the trading bloc faces tariffs of 30% that would kick in on August 1st. Trade with Canada and Mexico could be impacted if those nations don't reach a trade deal, while an August 12th deadline with China is likely to be pushed back as talks continues. So the U.S. made 2 more trade agreements this week, but dozens more countries could still be looking to make a deal as tariffs loom. President Donald Trump, he said he reached agreements with Japan and the Philippines on Tuesday. The agreement with with Japan, which sets tariffs at 15%, was perhaps the largest deal ever made, Trump said. He also announced a trade deal with the Philippines, setting a 19% tariff on goods imported into the U.S. These deals are in addition to deals made in previous weeks with Vietnam, Indonesia, and an agreement with the United Kingdom. Negotiations continue with several U.S. trading partners ahead of August 1st deadlines. If a deal isn't worked out by then, more than 24 countries will face higher tariffs, according to letters sent by Trump in recent weeks. Close trading partners such as Mexico, Canada, and the European Union will face import taxes of 30% or more. Now, last week, if everybody didn't see last week's episode, or last week's live stream, I should say, go back and check that out, because I literally went through an article where we ran through all those different countries and what their tariffs currently are, what they could be at the August 1st deadline. So if you want a little bit more information, like I said, go back to last week's live stream. I covered all that and we ran through all that information there. So okay, so we have this deal with Japan. Another big part or aspect of this Japanese deal was that we are going to get a $500 billion investment into the U.S. I mean, this is incredible. Japan basically said, yes, we're going to invest $500 billion into the U.S. to basically help us build, wait for it, all kinds of manufacturing here in the U.S. So that, again, it's another $500 billion heaped on the pile of now trillions of dollars of investment that's going to pour into the U.S. here over the next, 3-4 years, which again is just incredible. Trump Commerce Secretary Lutnick says U.S. auto CEOs are cool with higher tariffs than Japan. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick dismissed Detroit automakers' concerns about President Donald Trump's new trade deal with Japan. Lutnick said he spoke to U.S. auto manufacturing CEOs and that they are cool with it. The agreement Trump announced would see Japan accept a tariff of 15% on cars it exports to the U.S., in addition to pledging $550 billion in U.S. investments. So Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said Thursday that American auto CEOs told him they were cool with President Donald Trump's new trade deal, which could put lower tariffs on cars imported from Japan than on cars made by U.S. companies in Canada and Mexico. Lutnick brushed off complaints from a group representing General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis that Trump's plan could give Japanese automakers an advantage over the big three Detroit car companies. Oh my gosh, that's just so silly, Lutnick said on CNBC's Squawk on the Street after being asked about criticism by the American Automotive Policy Council. The agreement Trump announced Tuesday would see Japan accept a tariff of 15% on cars it exports to the U.S., in addition to pledging $550 billion in U.S. investments. But American auto companies will be on the hook for a 25% levy on cars they make in Canada and Mexico and import into the U.S. under tariffs imposed by Trump in April. Well, hey, guess what, guys? You're just going to have to bring that business back here, okay? Sorry, you're not going to be able to, go build those cars over in Canada and Mexico anymore. You're going to have to bring that manufacturing back here. Sorry, sorry, not sorry. It is what it is. But don't worry. Don't worry about paying those American workers those extra dollars to make those vehicles, because the American tariffs that are now in place, see that 15% tariff, that's going to protect those jobs now. Okay, that's what you have to understand. People always say pick an industry. Well, we'll go with auto industry, right? They'll go, other people around the world, China and Japan, they're undercutting us, because they can pay people less money or whatever. Well, do you know why they can pay people less money and undercut us? Because we weren't being aggressive with tariffs. You see, on the other side of the equation, like the Japanese, they would hit us with tariffs to protect their advantage with being able to pay people less money and thus steal those jobs away from us. Okay, you have to understand how this works. And this is a dynamic that, again, most people are not familiar with, because we haven't had a president to go out there and fight for American jobs and use tariffs to, wait for it, protect those American jobs. And, so this all works together. You bring these jobs back, and then you put think of the tariffs like a wall, an invisible wall that protect those jobs. Okay, that's what this does. And so all due respect to Ford and GM, guys, you're going to have to bring those jobs back here. Okay. Reopen those plants in Michigan, get them cranking again, baby. Hire these Americans to come work there. Okay. You know, let's make Michigan great again. How about that? There's a thought. Okay. Now we talked about the Japanese. So now we're shifting to the EU. And I talked about the EU a little bit last week. And I basically said, the EU better come to the table because it's going to get pretty painful for them real quick. And I'm going to show you something here in a minute. But Trump shifts gears to EU after striking Japan deal. So we have Europe coming in tomorrow, and the next day we have some other ones coming in. U.S. President Donald Trump said late on Tuesday, the August 1st deadline for 30% tariffs on imports from the EU to the U.S. is just days away. Now, President Trump, obviously over in Scotland right now, meeting over the next 5 days. He's going to be meeting with a lot of people from Europe to talk about these tariffs and see if they can figure out a deal. And right now, basically says so. U.S. plays hardball on tariffs deadline as EU battles for a deal. Yeah, the EU doesn't seem to be battling that hard for a deal at the moment. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick over the weekend warned that the deadline for a baseline 30% tariff is fixed. The bloc, meanwhile, is scrambling to reach an agreement with the U.S. Yeah, I don't know how much they're scrambling. They seem and here and let's see. Let's take a look at a couple other things here real quick. What Europe's response to a no deal with Trump could look like. So uncertainty remains about if and when a trade agreement between the EU and U.S. could be struck. The EU is preparing countermeasures in case of a no deal scenario. Talks of a potential deal have, however, also been heating up this week. So Brussels is preparing for a no deal scenario as uncertainty persists about if and when a trade agreement between the European Union and the U.S. will materialize. Lawmakers on Thursday signed off on a major package of counter tariffs, which would target a wide range of goods, and discussions are reportedly ongoing about deploying the EU's so-called trade bazooka. Measures could kick in soon as there are just a few days left before August 1st, after which EU imports to the U.S. are set to be slapped with 30% tariffs, and the EU is expected to respond promptly. Talks of a potential deal have, however, also been heating up this week, with sources telling CNBC that the current base case scenario for a deal includes a 15% tariff on EU imports to the U.S. Any possible exemptions are still being worked out, they noted. But crucially, much depends on U.S. President Donald Trump, who is known for last-minute changes of heart and quick decision-making. I don't know. There are therefore no guarantees about what a potential deal could look like. But I want to show you guys this here. Volkswagen cuts guidance after taking a $1.5 billion hit from U.S. tariffs in the first half. So German auto giant Volkswagen posted a sharp drop in second quarter profit, primarily due to high costs from increased U.S. import tariffs. The results come as Europe's automakers struggle to get grips with a series of industry challenges. U.S. President Donald Trump recently threatened again to raise duties to 30%. And then look at this. These charts show just how hard Trump's tariffs are hitting Europe's auto giants. So U.S. President Donald Trump imposed 25% tariffs on foreign-made vehicles and car parts in early April. Trading updates from Stellantis and Renault, as well as corporate earnings from Volvo Cars, show the extent to which Trump's tariffs have started to take their toll. So let's go down here. So U.S. tariffs on autos. So, EU auto imports, 27.5%, auto parts, 25%, steel and aluminum, 50%. Stellantis, preliminary results, for basically a $2.3 billion loss, to $3.3 billion in pre-tax charges. Let's go down to Renault. Obviously, stock price not doing so hot here, down 28% on the year. The tariffs affect imports as a share of U.S. car sales. VW, 80%. Mercedes, 63%. BMW, 52%. Stellantis, 45%. Yeah, so VW, 80%. Okay, that means they're sending 80% of their cars in here to the U.S. Yeah, you think they want to make a deal? Yeah, so they're getting crushed right now, and they are begging They are begging to get a deal done here, no doubt. And then we go on here to Bessent imposing August 1st tariffs will put more pressure on trade partners for deals. So Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent suggested that implementing a higher tariff level on countries would put more pressure on those countries to come with better agreements. The important thing with President Donald Trump's trade negotiations is the quality of the deal, not the timing of the deals, he told CNBC. Trump has postponed his country-specific tariff deadline 3 times since his April Liberation Day announcement. So, okay. But Trump suggests a 15 to 50% reciprocal tariffs on trading partners. And this, I believe, was from July 24th, so Friday. So President Donald Trump has reportedly said that the reciprocal tariffs he plans to levy on trading partners would range between 15 and 50% days after he struck a deal with Japan ahead of the August 1st deadline. We will have a straight, simple tariff on anywhere between 15 and 50%, Trump said Wednesday at an AI summit in Washington. We have 50 because we haven't been getting along with those countries too well. Japan's exports, including those of cars, would face 15% reciprocal tariffs rather than the 25% initially threatened by Trump. Trump's comments come amid reports that the U.S. and European Union officials are nearing a trade deal. So, and again, what have I been saying for months now? I've been saying that the smart people, the smart countries, they would come in and get a deal done first. And I think you've seen that with Vietnam, with Japan, with Indonesia. They recognize what's going on here, and they're saying, hey, we want to get in first and try to get a reasonable deal, because the next guy, the guys that are waiting, which are a lot of people, I guess maybe some people are waiting to take in the wait and see approach to see what happens, to see how serious Trump was really going to be. And now they're finding out the hard way. And let's see here. Look, African countries desperate to avoid Trump's latest tariff deadline. So nations in Africa are confident that deals can be reached with the U.S. government to avoid higher tariffs on August 1st. So this just goes to show you, these African countries, they, some of them talked a good game, waited around, and now all of a sudden they're desperate, baby. They see what's happening to Brazil. They see what's happening to Europe, and they're going, we need to get, we need to get some of these deals done here. Okay, and then now let's turn our attention to China for a minute, shall we? So Trump-China tariff deadline likely to be extended, Bessent says. So Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the U.S. is likely to hash out an extension of President Donald Trump's upcoming trade deadline with China. Bessent said he will be meeting with his Chinese counterparts in Stockholm next week. The two sides in mid-May agreed to a 90-day extension of most of the heavy tariffs on each other's goods while they continue trade negotiations. The U.S. wants to discuss the sanctioned Russian and Iranian oil that they're buying there and what they're doing to aid Russia and a Ukraine war, Bessent said. So we'll continue to see what happens there. But the China trade deadline is August 12th. So obviously we will watch to see if that deadline gets pushed back. So in another related story here, so U.S. businesses in China freeze new investment amid tariff war geopolitical tensions, survey found. So a survey found over half of U.S. companies in China are not investing, and most were affected by geopolitical tensions and concerns about China's slowing economy. So a record high proportion of U.S. companies in China have frozen new investment plans, with tariffs and U.S.-China relations among their top concerns, a new survey has found. Other top concerns include the right regulatory controls of the ruling Chinese Communist Party, such as export restrictions, sanctions, and investment screenings, Chinese industrial politics that favor domestic companies, China's slowing economic growth and lack of domestic demand, the CCP's opaque business environment, and industrial overcapacity that is affecting a broader range of sectors. According to the annual survey published on July 16th by the Washington-based U.S.-China Business Council, 52% of U.S. companies in China have no plans to invest in China this year, up from 20% in 2024. Kyle Sullivan, a vice president of business advisory services at the U.S. CBC, said 52% is a record high. A third of companies, 34%, said they have reduced or stopped planned investment in the country in the past year, up from a quarter, 26% in 2024. The proportion of companies making a profit in China remained stable in the past 3 weeks, with 82% reporting profits in 2024, but only 25% expecting better profit margins in the future. The level of pessimism regarding companies' 5-year outlook remains unchanged from a record high 29% reported in 2024. Businesses in China are less profitable now than they were years ago, but risks, including reputational risk, regulatory risk, and political risks, are increasing. So very interesting to see what continues to unfold here amongst, what businesses in China are doing and what the ramifications are. And then here is very interesting. Now, I've said here about this this trade war between Russia or between China and the U.S. We're in phases. And I think the trade war with China, because of how intertwined the U.S. and China are with each other, it is far more complicated than any of our other trading partners. So some partners are with us for military protection, like Japan and Taiwan, South Korea. So some are with us for political protection. Some we're with for geopolitical and strategic reasons. Some we're with for economic reasons. China is kind of this mishmash of everything, and trying to decouple from China is going to prove not easy, right? Because of how complicated this is. But like I said, we've kind of gone through this first phase where we both went back and forth, increasing tariffs on each other. And then we back in May, Scott Bessent met and they said, okay, we're going to pause everything for 90 days. That takes us to August 12th. And they're going to meet again. They're going to talk. My guess is they're going to postpone stuff again for a few more days, for a couple more months, kind of see what happens. China will continue to try to string the U.S. along. But I think this also signals here defending dollar supremacy may be the next phase of U.S.-China trade war. So we may be heading into the next phase here. So as the world's reserve currency and primary medium for financial transactions, the U.S. dollar is the linchpin of the U.S.-led global order. So the U.S.-China trade war may be transitioning to a monetary standoff as U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff policies kickstart a reshuffling of global supply chains and trade. Beijing is looking to another battleground, the Chinese yuan versus the U.S. dollar. Last month, Pan Gongsheng, head of China's central bank, reiterated the regime's interest in promoting the internationalization of the yuan, also known as the renminbi, at the Luzhuan Forum, a leading economic forum in Shanghai. The dominance of currencies, especially in the digital world, will be the next focus of the U.S.-China trade war, according to Mike Sun, a U.S.-based businessman with decades of experience advising foreign investors and traders doing business in China. He uses an alias to avoid reprisals from the Chinese regime. William Lee, chief economist at the Milken Institute, concurred. Lee told the Epoch Times that the fear of sanctions has spurred the regime to try to expand the use of the yuan and alternative cross-border payment system. Now, China is concerned about potential sanctions from its digital currencies can gain traction and become more widely adopted, he said. The concerns that Lee mentioned are front and center for policymakers in Beijing. In June's speech in Shanghai, China's central banker expressed concerns that the traditional cross-border payment infrastructures can be easily politicized, weaponized, and used as unilateral sanction instruments as the geopolitical tension escalates. Now, what is he talking about there? He's talking about Russia. He's talking about what we did to Russia. And he's basically saying that, yeah, this is a big concern here, and we can't just sit idly by. Another prominent chief economist in China, Lian Ping, wrote in late May, financial sanctions and countermeasures will probably become a battlefield of U.S.-China competition in the next phase. These economists are not just scholars, but a well-connected brain trust of senior Chinese Communist Party officials, Sun told the Epoch Times. Hence, these experts don't make recommendations. They foreshadow and interpret the regime's actions. Lian also warned that the United States might start imposing sanctions on a few Chinese entities, then expand the scope, eventually excluding China from the U.S. dollar-based system. As the world's reserve currency and primary medium for financial transactions, the U.S. dollar is the linchpin of the U.S.-led global order. By exporting commodities to China and then buying electric vehicles from China, the member countries of BRICS can form an alternative trading system dominated in the yuan, according to Lee. BRICS is a China and Russia-led bloc designated to counterbalance U.S.-led Western democracies that also included Brazil, India, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Ethiopia, Indonesia, and Iran. The BRICS philosophy of dethroning the dollar is a real and credible threat to the United States, and that's why Trump is imposing extra tariffs on these countries, according to Lee. So, as I had reported on, they had this thing here you can see from this picture. They had just a few weeks ago, they had this thing called the Rio Reset. And this was the BRICS meeting in Brazil for 2025. Okay, so they had the Rio Reset. And while this thing was going on, Trump threw the hammer down hard and basically said that, hey, any country that signs up for this is automatically going to get hit with an extra 10% on their tariffs. And that seemed to immediately put a kind of a cooling on this whole event. And I suspect that the rhetoric got really toned down because I think that they were planning on coming out with a very kind of show of force type of thing at this event. And it didn't really happen. It didn't really come out. You might also notice that there are a couple of quote unquote allies or friends to the U.S. sitting up on that stage there. I see the premier of India here. See some of our friends from Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. Trump was just over there securing massive investments from them. But again, the U.S. has also kind of done this to itself too, for just stupid actions, stupid foreign policy, a lot of nonsense, not just in recent years, but over the last 30, 40 years. This didn't just happen yesterday. This has been building. The BRICS, nations. This BRICS movement has been, building for a long, long time. This did not just start or just come about. So it says here, during its latest summit in Brazil, the BRICS members stated issues. A joint statement on July 6th criticizing tariffs without naming the United States. Shortly afterward, Trump said on Truth Social that any country aligning themselves with the anti-American policies of BRICS would receive an additional 10% tariff. Days later, he threatened a 50% levy on Brazil, a founding member of BRICS, citing the ongoing trial of its former president, Javier Bolsonaro, a Trump ally. At a cabinet meeting on July 8th, the U.S. president said BRICS wants to destroy the dollar so that another country could take over and be the standard. If we lost the world standard dollar, that would be like losing a war, a major world war, Trump said. We would not be the same country any longer. Yes, he is there. That's not hyperbole. That is absolute fact. We lose our status as the world reserve currency. I can't even fathom what that would look like. That would wreck our economy in ways that we would probably never recover from. And it just goes on to basically, to talk about, tariff battles and other things that are going on there. But again, we're talking about, what could potentially come in this next phase of the U.S.-China trade war. And again, BRICS is kind of playing into this. China wants the yuan to replace the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency, but that doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. Now, as far as the U.S. hitting China with Russia type, sanctions and economic sanctions and stuff like that, trying to cut them off in some way, I don't think we're going to go down that road again. I really don't, because we've seen that it didn't really work with Russia. And what it did was it caused all this. It caused this hyper momentum behind BRICS. And so basically, I think I don't think we're going to do that again. I think they're certainly going to hit with tariffs. They're going to probably threaten to do some other things, diplomatic stuff like that. I don't think, like I said, that they're going to come out with these full sanctions and try to cut China off necessarily from like the global economy. I just don't, and I don't think that would be a good strategy. I don't think that would work. It would give more credence to these BRICS nations. And like I said, I don't know that would go. But it's just interesting to note. And we will see, again, how this whole U.S.-China trade war evolves. Like I said, it's very complicated. We're going to have phases to this, and it's going to take some time. It's not going to resolve itself. Like I said back in January, this could take a year or two to play itself out. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a couple months. All right, I'll tell you what. At this time, before I get into all the other Fed news here, which I've got what I think is some pretty funny stuff coming up here. Here's a preview of what we're going to be looking at here. Just caption this. I got some funny things to share with everyone on this one. I think people will find some of this stuff funny. I certainly did. But anyway, all right. So this is the part of the program where I usually like to switch up. I like to talk about what are the economic indicators coming up this week. I like to go through some banking news, and I like to talk about what are the episodes that I put out this week. So let's jump into, what episodes did I put out this week? Well, on Monday, I had another installment of the crypto series. It was actually installment number 25. It was episode 429 called Historic Crypto Legislation, Tokenized Issues, and More. So this part 25 of the series, we reviewed recently signed crypto regulation, the Genius Act, and two additional bills. JP Morgan and the other big banks want to get involved with stablecoin. Ether jumps into the spotlight, and stock tokenization is not all it's made out to be. And we consider if crypto is bad for the government deficit. So again, if you're like the crypto series, you like what I'm putting out with that, might hopefully find a lot of that interesting. Then on Tuesday, I did episode 430, which was another installment of the AI update. So, and this episode examines multiple articles around artificial intelligence. So the Pentagon just awarded AI contracts to Google, Anthropic, OpenAI, and xAI. Sam Altman has become President Donald Trump's new buddy on AI. It's that kind of terrifying. The epic battle for AI talent continues. Google hires Windsurf CEO. CoreWeave's purchase of Core Scientific did not go as planned. CoreWeave and Blackstone to invest over $30 billion in established data centers in Pennsylvania. Westinghouse plans to build 10 large nuclear reactors in the U.S. Google unveils $25 billion AI infrastructure at PA Energy Summit. Meta says the first AI data supercluster will come online in 2026. Elon does not support a merger between Tesla and xAI, at least not now. And Amazon jumps into AI with Kiro. And Anthropic rolls out Claude AI for financial services. So a lot of and again, this is why I'm now, doing a few of these AI updates episodes, because there's just so much information around AI, and this will continue to affect everything, not just, banking and financial services, but pretty much every business, every industry out there. So, okay. And then the rest of the week was definitely more bank centric. So on Wednesday, I put out episode 431, Should It Matter Who Has Fed Master Accounts? And this is kind of like what I was talking about earlier. So this episode examines an article from Independent Banker magazine titled Carrie Mitchum, It Matters to Community Banks Who Has Master Accounts. And this gets into like the crypto legislation of the Genius Act. So the article focuses on Federal Reserve master accounts and how only traditional, highly regulated banks have historically had access to them. More recently, what they call crypto native and non-traditional financial companies have been seeking to get access to master accounts. The newly passed Genius Act may provide access for some of these companies under certain parameters. So again, kind of interesting conversation around that. On Thursday, episode 432, a deeper dive into the 2025 stress test results. So this episode examined a blog post from PCBB titled Key Factors Behind Lower Losses in the 2025 Stress Test Results. This blog post takes a deeper dive into the recent stress test results. The stress test results were influenced by three main factors: less severe scenario due to countercyclical design, 2, revised measurement of private equity exposures, and 3, high net revenue from improved bank performance. So these results can help small banks in three ways: benchmarking and strategic planning, anticipating regulatory direction, and better competitive positioning. So again, I thought this was really, again, interesting results there on the stress test. And then finally on Friday, I did episode 433, Should Small Banks Use the Zelle Payment Network? So this episode examined an article from Banking Drive titled Why Small Banks May Shun Zelle. So the Zelle Payment Network is owned by Early Warning Services, EWS. EWS is owned by the largest banks in the U.S. Zelle is a P2P, meaning peer-to-peer platform, which is currently the third largest behind Venmo and Cash App. Many smaller banks around the country have not signed up to use Zelle because of higher transaction rates and fraud issues. However, things could be changing based on some of the things that Zelle may or may not be wanting to do. But again, I saw that article on why some of the banks, especially community banks around the country, may not be jumping to use the Zelle network because, again, you're losing business in a very real sense to Venmo and Cash App. You got to have something to try to compete against that. And the best thing that banks have or potentially could have is the Zelle network. And but there's some really good reasons why banks are very reluctant to jump into that, even though they really need it. So again, just really, I think a really interesting article, really interesting discussion there on that. So okay, that was the 5 episodes that I had come out this week. All right, let's take what are the economic indicators coming out this week? So on Monday, July 28th, we have the 2-year Treasury note auction and the 5-year Treasury note auction. On Tuesday, July 29th, we get goods trade balance. We get the CB consumer confidence, we get the JOLTS job openings, and we get the Atlanta Fed GDP now for the second quarter. On Wednesday, July 30th, we get the ADP non-farm employment change, the GDP numbers, pending home sales, the FOMC statement at 2 o'clock. We get the Fed interest rate decision at 2 o'clock and the FOMC press conference at 2:30. On Thursday, July 31st, we get continuing jobless claims, initial jobless claims, Chicago PMI, and the Fed's balance sheet. And then finally, on Friday, August 1st, we get average hourly earnings, non-farm payrolls, unemployment rate, manufacturing PMI, and we get the Michigan consumer sentiment and the U.S. Baker Hughes oil rig count. So those are our economic indicators coming up this week. Obviously, Wednesday's the big day with the Fed interest rate decision and looking at what all is going to happen there, and we'll keep an eye on that. And obviously, it gives me great stuff to talk about next week, right? And I will talk about the potential Fed interest rate decision. I'll talk about that in a few minutes when we get back to some of these Fed articles. But now I just want to go into some banking news here real quick. Sorry, I need a break. I need to get some water. All right, guys. Let's roll. Okay, so new home sales increased in June. Mortgage rates edged downward. So the rate for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage was 6.74% this week, down slightly from 6.75 last week. So that's good news. President issues executive orders on AI. We talked about that a little bit ago, but the EOs cover accelerating federal permitting of data center infrastructure, promoting the export of the American AI technology stack, and preventing woke AI in the federal government. Second $1 billion credit union acquisition of a community bank was announced this week. So after a second acquisition this week of a tax-paying community bank by a tax-exempt $1 billion credit union, ICBA continued its call for policymakers to end the federal tax exemption for credit unions with $1 billion or more in assets. Now, this is an interesting thing because last year this was this topic had really gained a lot of momentum, because there was a record number of credit unions that had bought community banks last year, putting a lot of emphasis on, are these credit unions really still credit unions, or are they really banks and therefore should lose their tax exempt status? So again, and it got a little bit quieter this year because there weren't any purchases. Credit unions hadn't really been buying any banks for the first 6 months of the year, and then all of a sudden, last couple weeks, boom, we had two transactions here with this, and now all of a sudden this is getting hyped back up. So I imagine in the next couple of months we'll be hearing a lot more about this, because I have a feeling that there will be a few more acquisitions this year of credit unions buying banks. I don't think these are going to be the last two for the year, so this will continue beefing up that conversation. House committee passes ICBA advocated regulatory relief bills. So this is really interesting. So these newly passed bills were the FDIC Board Accountability Act, the Tailored Regulatory Updates for Supervisory Testing, the Trust Act of 2025, and bringing the discount window into the 21st Century Act, HR 3390. So I think these were really good bills. The FDIC Board Accountability Act, it would require the appointment of a member of the FDIC Board of Directors with experience in small depository institutions. It's kind of like Mickey Bowman getting appointed to the Fed as, kind of representing community banks. But now with her moving over to the different position, they're going to bring somebody else in to kind of fill that spot. So now they kind of want to do the same thing with the FDIC, which again, I think is really good. So again, we'll keep an eye on a couple of those bills, but good news. I think those will be very good. Administration releases artificial intelligence action plan. So the White House released an AI action plan that includes removing barriers to innovation. Yeah, we talked about that. Existing home sales fell in June. Existing home sales decreased 2.7% in June, but were unchanged from a year ago. Weekly mortgage applications increased. House committee passes regulatory relief bill with more votes set for today. Again, that was this stuff that we just talked about. I got a lot of repetitive stuff here. I don't know what's going on. ICBA reiterates call for policy change following latest credit union acquisition. Yes. So again, like I said, we're going to hear more about that. CISA updates alerts on SharePoint vulnerabilities with new Microsoft guidance. So the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency updated its alerts on vulnerabilities with Microsoft SharePoint servers to reflect the newly released information from Microsoft. We talked about this earlier in the evening. Microsoft obviously having huge problems getting hacked by all these Chinese groups. So again, CISA releasing some information there to hopefully help companies protect with vulnerabilities in the Microsoft SharePoint. ICB urges the CFPB to modify the TRID disclosure form. So ICBA urged the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to move its TRID sandbox project forward with a modified TILA-RESPA integrated disclosure TRID from developed by the ICBA. So again, that's all real estate related stuff. I'll get into if stuff actually happens with that, I'll cover that more later on. FinCEN postpones and then reopens investment advisor rules. So the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network announced its intention to postpone the effective date of its final rule to establish anti-money laundering, countering the financing of terrorism and suspicious activity report requirements for registered investment advisors. So, but now I guess they pushed it back until January 1st, 2028. See what happens there. FSISAC highlights a banking Trojan. So basically they're saying that a Trojan called Anatsa banking Trojan is being used against mobile banking customers in North America. So Anatsa has been active since 2020 and has begun targeting financial institutions and Android mobile banking apps. The Trojan steals financial data through overlay and key logging, although it can also conduct fraudulent transactions remotely. So very interesting and very scary. ICBA shares near-term regulatory priorities and letter to Vice Chair Bowman. They're looking to fix broken regulations harming communities, revising bank merger policies, fuel the future of community banking. So there's good stuff there. Agencies launch final round of feedback on regulatory burden under this is one of my favorites, EGRPRA review. So what is that? That is the Economic Growth and Regulatory Paperwork Reduction Act. So in other words, it's trying to reduce some regulations, save some money there. So we'll see what keeps on going there. All right, still got there. Growth in farm lending eases. Housing starts, building permits increase in June. Consumer sentiment up slightly in early June. ICBA opposes Wise's application for a national trust bank charter. So ICBA told the OCC it strongly opposes Wise's application for a national trust bank charter. Wise, an international finance services company headquartered in London, is seeking a national trust bank charter to apply for access to a Federal Reserve master account to facilitate its cross-border payments business. So the ICBA is basically telling the OCC they do not want that to happen. Also, the ICBA, OCC should postpone decisions on recent charter applications. So the ICBA and other groups told the OCC that recent national bank charter applications raised substantial concerns and urged the OCC to postpone considering the applications. So, yes, so in a joint letter concerning the National Trust Charter application submitted by National Digital TR Company, Fidelity Digital Assets, Fidelity National Digital Currency Bank, and Ripple National TR Bank, ICBA, and other groups said there are significant policy and legal questions as to whether the applicants' proposed business plans evolve the types of fiduciary activities performed by national trust banks. Granting these applications could represent a fundamental departure from existing OCDC precedent, and public portions of the applications do not allow for meaningful public scrutiny, and broader change to OCC policy with respect to trust activities requires public scrutiny. Senators introduce a bill to roll back the 1071 requirements. This is fantastic news. Senators Katie Britt and John Boozman introduced legislation to shield community banks from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's Section 1071 Small Business Reporting Rule. The Preventing Regulatory Overreach to Empower Communities to Thrive and Ensure Data Privacy Protected Act would exempt community banks with less than $10 billion in assets or that have originated fewer than 2,500 small business credit transactions in each of the previous 2 years, restrict the definition of affected small businesses to entities with gross annual revenues of less than $1 million to reduce the reporting burden, and require the CFPB to conduct updated cost-benefit analyses prior to the rule's implementation. So yes, that is fantastic. I would hope that passes. So, and then Genius Act signed into law. So that's good stuff. Okay, so that's the banking news, the direct banking news, I should say, that I have for everybody this week. So now let's jump back. I want to get to the juicy stuff that I got here for everybody now. So, all right, let's start our conversation here on the Fed with this. Mohamed El-Erian. If anybody who has watched CNBC in the last, 20-something years, Mohamed El-Erian is obviously major player on the kind of U.S. and global stage. Very prominent figure on CNBC all the time. CNBC loves kissing his butt. It's kind of like anytime Warren Buffett comes on, they get Becky. Becky's out there with the quickness to take care of Warren. Kind of like El-Erian gets kind of the same treatment there on CNBC, which is good for him. But he broke ranks with Wall Street and says that Powell should resign to preserve Fed independence. Okay, so this guy gets it. He understands it. This is what I've been talking about for months and months now. Okay, Jeremy Powell, he is risking. He is playing. I've been saying this for months. He's been playing with fire. He doesn't understand that. I keep saying, this is not 1980. It's not 1990. It's not 2000. You have a lot of people that have woken up to the fact that the Federal Reserve has not been doing a good job for a long time. And you have a lot of people in Congress that are salivating to get their hands on the Fed, okay, and neuter the Fed in a lot of respects. And this argument of Fed independence is feeling mighty, mighty weak at the moment, And Jeremy Powell, okay, right now he's been holding out, resisting. He's the resistance, which is a joke in and of itself. But he's been resisting lowering the interest rates. And what's going to happen here is he is doing this at the Fed's peril. Because, and like I said, what we're going to see here, but El Arian, he gets it. And he's sitting there, he's going, man, he's like, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. You may win a battle, but you're going to lose the war here. And you know, it would be better for Powell just to step down and go away, let the Fed preserve this independence. And you know, give Trump, basically put somebody in there, give Trump some cuts, and have him leave us alone so we can fade, you know, into the background for the time being. And to drive home my point, Treasury Secretary Bessent calls for a review of the entire Federal Reserve. Oh, there it is. Boom. In a CNBC interview, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent suggested a review of the Federal Reserve that would go beyond the current controversy over building renovation and look at its overall function. The comments come amid an intensifying conflict between the White House and the central bank. Bessent backed the idea that the Fed probably should be easing with inflation mostly moderately. Obviously, what do I think of? Ron Paul wrote the famous book, End the Fed. Ron Paul was a proponent of, reining in the Federal Reserve for 40 years and maybe 50 years. And, now we've got Rand Paul, his son in the Senate, U.S. Senator, and Rand Paul is calling, he wants a full audit of the Federal Reserve. Congressman Mike Lee is calling for basically, hey, we need to open up the Federal Reserve Act and we need to start making some big changes. That's what's happening here. So again, El Arian, he sees the writing on the wall. He sees exactly what I see. He's saying exactly what I'm saying. Is that, hey, pal, this ain't worth it, man. It ain't worth it. Give up the ghost. Give up the ghost. Walk out now, and maybe hold some shred of dignity as you walk out the door. Then, of course, we had the whole, Trump went over to the Federal Reserve and looked at, examined the building. And then basically Bessent says, hey, look, Powell doesn't need to resign, but we should still conduct an internal review. So that was Monday. And then this is now on Tuesday. And we see as we're going throughout the week here, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Tuesday asserted that Fed Chair Jeremy Powell does not need to resign, though he also repeated his desire for a review of the central bank's operations. There's nothing that tells me that he should step down right now. He's been a good public servant, Bessent said. So again, that's called extending the olive branch. Now we get to the good stuff, the juicy stuff. Trump spars with Powell over renovation costs during Fed visit, but backs off firing threats. President Trump and Federal Reserve Chairman Jeremy Powell went back and forth about the cost of ongoing renovations at the Fed headquarters in Washington. A rare Fed visit came as Trump and his administration ramp up criticism of the central bank chairman and urge him to lower interest rates. But Trump also suggested that he was abandoning any consideration of firing Powell before his term expires next May. The visit is also occurring as Trump seeks to divert attention from controversies. Yeah, okay, no, I don't believe that's true. I believe that it's coming because Jeremy Powell does not want to reduce interest rates, and he's just being absolutely ridiculous. So this was in my mind, this was the picture of the week right here. So we got Trump and Powell here, and I just want to show you guys a couple things here. So there's a couple of funny things here. He's reading the note. I could do what I want, Don. Dad, 11-year-old, failing report card. He points out lower interest rates. And then there was another one down here that was really good. I like this one. He's looking at it, and then it says over here, 50 basis points or El Salvador. Gotta love it, man. Gotta love it. But Powell looked. You can't even express how absolutely uncomfortable Jeremy Powell looked in this moment. He looked just weak and feckless and just totally out of his depth. And I'll tell you what, he couldn't have had, in a certain respect, if you were going to have a president come over to review what you were doing, you don't have the guy who's been a real estate developer his entire life, that has developed some of the biggest projects in New York and Chicago. That's not the guy that you want coming over to inspect your construction project. It's like, that's like the kiss of death right there. So again, this was the money shot right here. But again, I mean, and look, Trump backed off of the firing threats because he won. He proved his point. And basically, Besson's sitting there saying, "Hey, you know what? We need a full review." And he's got Rand Paul, he's got Mike Lee, he's got a whole bunch of other people running around right now in Congress saying, "Yeah, you know what? Let's get in there. Let's audit. Let's review the whole Federal Reserve." And so again, Jeremy Powell, he could continue to play his games. He could continue to do the stupid stuff and not make decisions. That's his prerogative, okay? The Fed as an institution, at the end of the day, is going to end up paying a mighty price for this. And we shall see. So let's see here. Now let's get into the war of the words. So Trump says he believes Powell is ready to start lowering rates. President Trump expressed confidence the Federal Reserve will start lowering interest rates a day after he met with central banker Jeremy Powell. White House Budget Director Russ Vought kept up the heat on the Fed's renovation project, pushing the case for a review while pressing for lower interest rates. Now, on the other hand, Federal Reserve likely to hold interest rates steady despite pressure from Trump. Here's what that means for your money. So, it means nothing's getting cheaper for you. Despite escalating political pressure from Donald Trump, the Federal Reserve is widely expected to hold its benchmark short-term borrowing rate steady at its meeting next week. All sorts of consumer borrowing costs are impacted by what the central bank decides, from mortgage rates and auto loans to credit cards and savings accounts. Here's a look at how the Fed affects your finances. Yeah, we know. It's expensive, and they're not doing anything to help us out or make it cheaper. So again, and I just wanted to point this out that, on the one hand, Trump's saying, "Oh yeah, they're ready to cut rates," and on the other hand, we're getting this, obviously leaked from the Fed, basically saying like, no, we're not ready to cut rates. We're not going to do anything. So with that being said, like, okay, we got the Fed, the FOMC meeting coming up this week. What are they going to do? Are they going to cut rates? Are they not going to cut rates? My guess is they're still not going to cut rates, that they're still going to stand pat. But here is what I want to see. Okay. And this gets us into the next one. So, who will succeed Fed Jeremy Powell? Here are the top contenders. So we need regime change at the Fed, said one leading contender to head the Federal Reserve. So right now we've got kind of the big four. We got the two Kevins. We got Kevin Warsh, a former Fed governor, has been repeatedly linked to the Trump administration. We've got Chris Waller. Chris Waller, nominated by Trump in 2019 to serve as the Federal Reserve Board for a term running through January of 2030, has become a candidate to lead the central bank in recent weeks. Chris Waller has publicly called, he's been on CNBC a couple of times, calling for cuts in interest rates, saying that, hey, the time is right. We need to do this. Then we get Scott Bessent, obviously Treasury Secretary. And then we get the second Kevin Hassett. The National Economic Council Director, Kevin Hassett, has been floated as a potential candidate for the Fed, with the predictions market giving him a 14% chance of being selected by the president. So those are our top four candidates here. Now, we also, Michelle Mickey Bowman is there. And what I would say is, so especially to Chris Waller and to Michelle Mickey Bowman, I would say to them, talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. What I want to see at this week's meeting, okay, if there's going to be no interest rate cut, what I want to see is forward guidance. I want to see Jeremy Powell basically tell us that, okay, I'm not cutting rates this meeting, but maybe starting in September, I'm going to come out and we're going to do a couple, quarter point rate decreases, couple quarter point rate cuts, and we will see how it goes. What I want to see is, I want to see Waller and I want to see Michelle Mickey Bowman. I want to see them put their money where their mouth is. I want to see dissenting votes. If they do not decrease interest rates and Jeremy Powell continues on with his kind of BS for why he's not doing anything, I want to start seeing dissenting votes. Okay. Don't go on CNBC. Don't run over there begging Trump for the job. No. I don't want to see that. What I want to see is I want to see dissenting votes. I want to see dissenting votes, and then I want you to see you come out the next day and basically say, yeah, I didn't agree with Powell, and I put in a dissenting vote, and I put my money where my mouth was, okay? And I gave him pushback in the meeting, and I said that now's the time we need to start cutting rates. That's what I would like to see. Whether or not that comes to pass, I don't know, but we'll see. But again, if these guys are serious about wanting this job and they're serious about vying for this, I don't want to see any of this, pussyfooting around and oh, okay, good talk, and they run on CNBC, but then they get into the meeting and they still vote for it, whatever. No, I don't want to see any of that. Dissenting votes. Okay, I just did an interview with Dr. Thomas Honig on the Lords of Easy Money, talking to him about his dissenting votes back in 2010. Why don't we have some people show some courage? Why don't we have some people show some guts and show some bravery and show some dissenting votes like Thomas Honig had the guts to do back in 2010? How about we start with that? So let's go that. Okay. It's my diatribe. Okay. So now that ends the Fed. So I got just a couple more stories here for everybody here before we get out of here tonight. So Trump talked about a proposed capital gains on real estate this week. So how Trump's capital gains tax proposal could help home buyers and sellers. So President Donald Trump proposed eliminating capital gains for homeowners who profit from selling their homes. While many homeowners get part of their profits exempted, the cap on capital gains exceptions has not been updated in almost 30 years, increasing the tax burden of selling, especially for those whose homes values have significantly increased. This proposal could make it easier for potential home sellers who have kept to the sidelines to finally sell their homes, jumpstarting the housing market and making home prices more affordable for potential home buyers. So a new proposal by President Donald Trump could make it easier for homeowners to sell their homes and improve affordability for potential home buyers. In a meeting with the Philippines president on Tuesday, Trump said he is considering eliminating the capital gains tax on home sales in an attempt to revive the stagnant housing market. This move would likely require legislative action from Congress. Capital gains are the profits an individual makes after selling an asset, such as stock shares or a house. Those gains are then taxed depending on the individual's income. Homeowners who sell their primary residence can exempt parts of their profits if they've lived in the home for 2 or more years, up to $250,000 for single taxpayers and $500,000 for married couples filing taxes jointly. So Trump's proposal would remove the cap on home profits that can be exempt. So again, I think this would be a great thing. I would tell people, I think the biggest thing is, I think the biggest thing to getting home affordability back is obviously supply and demand. We need more supply on the market. And that's what this is proposing to do by getting rid of the capital gains on houses, meaning that, if you sold your house and you made $1 million profit, that, you wouldn't have to pay taxes on that. And obviously that would get people, more excited about selling their houses, right? So that could help with the inventory issue. But I also think that interest rates are a huge part in it, right? You get interest rates down, makes houses more affordable. People will naturally start buying houses again. People would be more willing to maybe do refinances, pull cash out, do other things, home renovations, home improvement projects, all that kind of stuff. So again, I think this is nice. And I think this would be really good. I think it would really help people. But again, I don't think it's going to be like this magic elixir that will magically cause this, booming of the housing market. But again, it's good. I support it. I think it'd be great. And hopefully it's another good thing that they do. So it'd be good. Okay, affordable housing projects stall over proposed cuts to rental assistance. So the Trump administration's plan to cut $27 billion would make it harder to maintain and pay debts on these properties, developers say. The Trump administration proposes a $27 billion reduction in federal programs to provide real estate assistance to low-income individuals. Uncertainty around the proposed cuts is stalling new affordable housing projects and causing some lenders to pull back from deals. Developers fear that the cuts would shrink revenue for affordable apartments, making it harder to maintain properties and pay debt. Yeah, I mean, I kind of have mixed feelings on this one because obviously we do need affordable housing. However, I feel like they're, again, just my 2 cents. I think there are already way too many people on, on Section 8. I think there's way too many. I think there's probably a good, percentage of people abusing the system, as it were. And also, there are these plans that I have not been a fan of, which basically, the Democrats have this idea that, they want to flood suburban America with affordable housing. They want to move all these people from the city out to the suburbs and just flood the suburbs with affordable housing. And I'm not a fan of that. I'm not a fan of that. Don't want it, so no. So if this kind of holds back or stops those plans, I'm okay with it. All right. It is what it is. So anyway, but again, it was interesting. I thought I would bring that forward to everybody. So, okay, here's another interesting article. Just like we had the article about the banker who got stuck in China, this was another big banker-related article. So Tom Hayes, the LIBOR ringleader, wins UK appeal to clear his name. Former trader became the face of bad banker behavior, serving 5 years in prison. So Tom Hayes, previously convicted in the LIBOR scandal, also known as the London Whale, won his appeal at the UK Supreme Court, overturning his 2015 conviction. Hayes, a former UBS and Citigroup trader, was convicted of manipulating LIBOR, benchmark used in financial contracts. The judges ruled that the initial trial was flawed because the jury was not allowed to consider key facts about LIBOR submissions. So again, this is just very interesting. I mean, this is a saga that's been going on for this guy, for Tom Hayes, for 10 years. He was convicted. He spent 5 years in prison. And then the UK Supreme Court on Wednesday, squashed the landmark 2015 conviction, which saw Hayes, 45, spend more than 5 years in prison before he was released in 2021. The former UBS and Citigroup trader had been convicted for working with others to manipulate the London Interbank Offer Rate, or LIBOR, to benefit his trading book and earn higher pay and bonuses. The industry-wide LIBOR scandal broke in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, adding to public anger at the time and costing banks around $10 billion in penalties. The former benchmark was used in trillions of dollars of financial contracts around the globe before being retired last year. So again, this was a very interesting case, a very interesting saga. I'm not necessarily going to, because I could spend 40 minutes just talking about this. I'm not going to go through it, at least right now. I might give this its own episode just to kind of talk about all the factors and everything involved. But like I said, this is a saga. It started back in 2008. He got convicted. It took many years for him to get to court, getting convicted in 2015, and spending 5 years in prison, getting let out in 2021, and now finally getting this overturned by the UK Supreme Court. So just a very interesting case, very interesting scandal stemming out of 2008. And like I said, I'll probably share or do more on this later on. So here's another interesting story. So Polymarket's derivatives exchange acquisition set stage for a return to the United States. So Polymarket earlier this week completed the acquisition of derivatives exchange and clearinghouse QCX. The acquisition paves the way for the crypto-based prediction market to return to the U.S., where it has been barred from operating since striking a deal with federal regulators in 2022. The Trump administration earlier this month ended an investigation into whether Polymarket violates its agreement by accepting U.S.-based bets. The company on Monday acquired derivatives exchange and clearinghouse QCX for $112 million, paving the way for it return to this market. The acquisition comes weeks after the Commodity Futures Trading Commission granted QCX a license to operate as a contract market. With the acquisition from QCEX, we are laying the foundation to bring Polymarket home, re-entering the U.S. as a fully regulated and compliant platform that will allow Americans to trade their opinions, Polymarket CEO Shane Copeland said in a press release. I think, Polymarket is a very interesting thing because I don't know if anybody else did, but during the last election and for other election cycles and things like that, Polymarket has been the go-to place. I mean, you can look at polling, you can look at all this other stuff, but the polling a lot of times proved to be wildly inaccurate. Polymarket, their polling on elections proved to be very, very accurate. So again, it's a fascinating thing to see. But Polymarket could be one of these companies in the years ahead that really becomes if again, I think it probably already has in a very real respect, but I think in a much more mainstream way becomes like the go-to place. Like if you want to know what do people think about a stock or what do people think about this sports event or what people think about the politics, whatever, like Polymarkets could really become that go-to market to check all that stuff out. Like I said, I think in a very real sense, it already has become that, but I think it's more so. So, okay. This student loan repayment plan is expanding, creating a path for borrowers to switch. So I saw this. So the Department of Education is immediately enacting 2 new provisions from the One Big Beautiful Bill that will allow more student loan borrowers to enroll in the income-based repayment plan. The bill overhauls the student loan repayment system. IBR is the only existing income-driven repayment plan that will remain available after all the changes take effect over the next 3 years. That means many existing borrowers will have to switch to the IBR plan in the coming years. So I will certainly have more information on this as it develops. Okay. 3 more articles here for you guys, and then we're going to wrap up. So banks hate buy now, pay later and may penalize its users. So lenders are wary of the fast-growing installment plans, but FICO says they could lift credit scores. So banks are wary of buy now, pay later plans and say overuse might hurt chances of mortgage or credit card approval. FICO's new credit model will factor in some buy now, pay later loans. Lenders are concerned about risks, with some banks warning against buy now, pay later and scrutinizing loan applications more closely. Banks don't want you to binge on buy now, pay later plans. They say it might actually hurt your chances of getting approved for a mortgage or credit card. Some of the popular point of sale loans from companies such as Affirm and Klarna will be factored into credit scores later this year when FICO rolls out its new scoring model. Using a loan to pay for a couch or a pair of pants in installments might improve your score if you keep up with the payments, according to Fair Isaac Corp., the company behind the most widely used U.S. credit score. Lenders are more wary. One credit union calls on customers who use buy now, pay later and warns against it. A community bank scrutinizes loan applications more closely when it notices them in the underwriting. JP Morgan Chase and Capital One have even barred customers from using credit cards to pay down the installment loans. So again, this is very interesting. It's a very interesting development. I have been following the buy now, pay later for a while. And again, I think bankers have a very good point when they scrutinize this. In and of itself, buy now, pay later is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's like anything else, best used in moderation, right? And I think that if I was underwriting someone to determine their credit worthiness and looking at the risk factors, I think, if I saw 50, 100 buy now, pay later loans, I might sit there. It would be like if I opened up somebody's credit report and I saw that they had, $100,000 in credit card debt. I would say that would give me pause, and you would sit there and you basically say, whoa, this person obviously has a serious spending problem. Like I should say, I should quantify that by saying it like this. If somebody is making $300,000 a year and they've got $100,000 credit card bill, they got a spending problem. Okay. if somebody is making, $5 million a year and they've got $100,000, okay, who cares? Okay, they probably have $1 million in cash on hand and can pay that thing off whatever they want. So again, you got to look at all the factors and look at what somebody's doing. But again, if somebody's making 100, 200, 300,000 a year and they've got 100, 150,000 of credit card debt, something ain't right there. And it's kind of the same thing. If somebody's making 100 grand a year and they've got 300 buy now pay later bills on their credit report, yeah, I'm gonna look at that with a very suspicious eye and basically say, yeah, I don't know if we want to give this person a credit card. I don't know if we want to give this person a mortgage. They may not be a good bet. However, if you're a teenager, you're in your 20s, you're in college, and you're trying to build credit, buy now pay later, it could help you do that. So again, I'm not saying that I'm not, poo-pooing buy now, pay later. I'm not saying that there aren't practical uses for it. I'm just saying that it's you got to watch the amount of usage. That's all. That's all. So, okay. Banks are getting pickier about whom they want as credit card customers. So new account openings across 4 big lenders were down 5% in the second quarter from a year earlier. So you can see here Wells Fargo, Citibank, Bank of America, and AMX. You can see here on the right that, they're definitely down here a little bit. Credit card companies are becoming more selective, opening fewer accounts, especially for lower end customers. Lenders are targeting consumers with higher credit scores as premium cards and heavy spenders drive growth. Card balances are rising while interest rates increase, but delinquencies remain steady. So banks are making credit cards harder to get for some customers. And I think their share of pre-screened credit card offers mailed to customers has really gone up here, up 87%. So that's interesting. It's up here. Growth in credit card spending. You can see here, Wells Fargo seen a lot of growth there. Growth in credit card balances. Obviously, Bank of our AMX here has seen the largest increase with that, 8.37%. So again, it's just very interesting. I saw, like I said, I wanted to show these two together, the buy now, pay later discussion, and then this bank's getting a little pickier on credit cards. Not that one necessarily has to do with the other, but I think they both kind of play in to each other in certain respects. So that's all. So like I said, more information on that later. And then finally, last story of the night, I saw this and I thought that this would be a good way to end the show tonight with this one. So how McDonald's lost its value edge and is trying to claw it back. So the chain that staked its name and affordability found itself on the wrong end of a shaky economy. So, when Americans hit hard times, McDonald's has relied on a simple recipe to keep sales humming: be fast and be cheap. For many people these days, McDonald's is just fast. Bro, what happened to McDonald's dollar menu? A sad woman asked on TikTok earlier this year, sharing images of a $12 McDouble meal and $3 fries. The once golden formula faltered. The number of fast food customers who said the restaurant chain offered good value fell to its lowest point in a decade last year, according to a UBS Evidence Labor Lab survey. Lower and middle-income households have cut back on visits, contributing this year to the biggest drop in McDonald's quarterly U.S. sales since 2020. The burger giant's leaders are all too aware that there's a problem. Well, that's good because, they don't seem to be aware that there's a major problem. I want to see if is there a picture of a McDonald's. I don't know if they have a picture of the outside of McDonald's in this particular. Well, here's the original McDonald's. Yeah, Ray Kroc would be turning over in his grave right now. So, let's see here. Is there any? All right, now they don't have I was hoping they had a picture of a new McDonald's right here. So here's my thing with McDonald's. Okay, first of all, I think the food for the most part, they still got fantastic fries. I'll give them that, but I think the food for the most part has become garbage. It's become way too expensive, and I always tell people, you can use fast food is a great, just like if you want to get an idea, sometimes there are these kind of rules, these kind of little things that you can use from time to time to get a bead on what's happening in the economy. And when you're looking at like real estate, you could sit there and say, okay, how are Home Depot and Lowe's doing? And if Home Depot and Lowe's are doing pretty good, then you could basically say, okay, yeah, real estate's probably doing pretty good over here. Same thing with fast food. When you want to get an idea, how's the consumer doing? How are middle to lower income people doing? Let's take a look at fast food. How are the fast food chains doing? And I always said this, and I said this in the election last year. The minute that fast food prices start to go up and people start complaining about it, the Democrats in particular, you got a problem, okay? Because a lot of your constituents are buying fast food, okay? And if the fast food gets to a price point that they're complaining about the cost of it, you got a problem. You got a big problem. And and that's a sidebar note, but it gets back to like McDonald's in particular as a brand. They used to be, when you go back to the 80s and 90s, their employees used to be the standard, the gold bar in the fast food industry for how well they were trained, how the professional they looked. Now I would give that title to Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A, you go in, you could tell that their employees are well trained. They're dressed nice. The stores are clean. They're very polite. They're very polished for the most part. They're very, very, they do a great job. Next time you go into a fast food restaurant, think about all these little things when you go into there. How did the people react with you? Did they smile? Were they nice? Were they courteous? Did they offer, compliments if possible? What was the decor? And again, McDonald's used to be this bright, vibrant, welcoming, fast food establishment. It used to have bright red, yellow colors, the golden arches, just like this with the red and yellow here. Their customers used to be dressed, their employees used to be dressed like, in a nice fashion. You had Ronald McDonald and a Hamburglar and all this stuff running around. You had playgrounds for the kids. Now, I don't even go into McDonald's. I don't even want to go to McDonald's because literally you look at the restaurants and they look like the most depressing places on earth. So my advice to McDonald's would be, paint all of your restaurants immediately. Okay. Bring the red and the yellow back, bring the high color back. Bring your little playgrounds back, bring Ronald McDonald and the Hamburglar, bring all those guys back immediately. Okay. Lower the cost of your menu, start getting better food out there. Okay. And not some of the garbage that you have out there right now. Get back to doing what you do best. And again, that's just my simple thing. It's just, I just, like I said, I saw this article and I wanted to go on a rant because, they sit there and they say how, oh, well, McDonald's, their management's well aware of what's going on. To me, they don't seem to be well aware. They seem to be totally oblivious. They seem to be totally clueless as to what the problem is. But yeah, I could, again, if you guys want to hire me, I'm available. I'm just saying, you can call me. I'll get all your problems fixed real quick. Anyway, okay. That's my little rant on Mickey D's, as it were. So, okay, let's do our story of the week and quote of the week so we can get out of here. So let's do, okay, so story of the week, we are going to do the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC. So the FDIC is an independent federal agency insuring deposits in U.S. banks and thrifts in the event of bank failures. The FDIC was created in 1933 to maintain public confidence and encourage stability in the financial system through the promotion of sound banking practices. The standard deposit insurance coverage limit is up to $250,000 per depositor as long as the institution is a member firm. It is critical for consumers to confirm if their institution is FDIC insured. For example, if a couple has $500,000 in a joint account as well as $250,000 in an eligible retirement account, the entire $750,000 would be covered by the FDIC, as each co-owner's share of the joint account would be covered, and the retirement account represents a different account category. The FDIC provides an interactive tool to check whether assets are covered on their website. So that is the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So, okay, our quote of the week here. So with the losses that we had this week, Ozzy Osbourne, Hulk Hogan, some of the big things that happened. I thought that this quote was very apropos. So this is from a poem. Don't really know who the author is on this one, but I just thought this one was very good. So here we go. So the clock of life is wound but once, and no man has the power to tell just when the hands will stop at late or early hour. Now is the only time you own. Live, love, toil with a will. Place no faith in time, for the clock may soon be still. So again, the point there being is that none of us know how much time we have in this world, and people pass away suddenly. So if you got something to say it. If you need to bury the hatchet on something, bury it. So no time like the present. So all right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this Saturday night here in the strategy room. I really appreciate it. I will wrap up by basically saying, if you like this live stream or you like the episodes, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe, as that really helps the channel. Remember, we are on YouTube, Rumble, and all major podcast platforms. Please be sure to leave your comments in the comments section, as I always love getting back to everybody. And as always, please check out some of the other content on the channel. I hope everybody has a great weekend. We will be back here again next week, same time, same channel, 8 p.m. on Saturday night for another episode of the Strategy Room. I hope everybody has a great week out there. Keep an eye out for the episodes I have coming out this week, and I will see everyone again real soon. Thanks a lot for listening and watching. I'll see you later.